Chapter 1. The kitchen was too quiet. The kitchen was too quiet for a Tuesday night, not the peaceful kind of quiet. Not the comforting silence that settles in when everything is finally done. This was the kind that presses against your ears, the kind that makes your chest tighten before you even understand why. I remember standing at the edge of the hallway, one hand resting on the wall, the other still holding my phone. I had come home early. That alone should have told me something was off. I wasn't supposed to be there yet. The light over the kitchen island was on. A warm, yellow glow spilling onto the countertop. I could hear voices, low, muffled, careful. A woman's laugh. Soft. Familiar in a way that made my stomach drop before my brain could catch up. For a second, I told myself it was nothing. Maybe he was on the phone. Maybe the TV was on. Maybe I was just tired, imagining things the way tired people do after long days and longer weeks. I took one more step forward. That's when I saw them. My husband was standing by the sink, his back half turned toward me. His sleeves were rolled up the way he always did when he cooked. The way I loved, once. There was a glass of wine on the counter, my wine glass. The one with the tiny chip on the rim from the night we moved in, and standing way too close to him was a woman I recognized instantly. Her hand was on his arm. Not casually. Not politely. Possessively. He leaned in. She smiled. Something inside me went cold. I didn't scream. I didn't drop my phone. I didn't even breathe, I think. Time did that strange thing where it stretches and shrinks at the same time. Where you notice details you'll never forget and forget the ones that don't matter. The hum of the refrigerator, the faint smell of garlic and olive oil, the sound of my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. He turned his head slightly and that's when he saw me. Our eyes met. I will never forget the look on his face, not guilt, not shock, not even fear. It was irritation. Sharp and quick, like I had interrupted something important. He stepped away from her just enough to look innocent. Just enough to pretend. Then he walked toward me, slow. Controlled. When he reached me, he leaned in close, his mouth near my ear, his voice low and urgent. Don't make a scene. That was it. Not I can explain, not your misunderstanding, not even please, just a command. Don't make a scene. The woman behind him shifted awkwardly. I could feel her watching me, measuring me, waiting to see what kind of woman I was going to be. The yelling kind, the crying kind, the kind who begs. I surprised all of us. I said nothing. I looked at him for one long second, searching his face for something familiar. Something human. Something that looked like the man I married. I didn't find it. So I nodded once, then I turned around and walked back down the hallway, my steps steady, my face calm, my hands shaking so badly I had to press them against my sides. I locked myself in the bathroom and stared at my reflection. The woman looking back at me didn't look broken. She didn't look dramatic. She looked quiet. Too quiet. I remember thinking how strange it was that betrayal didn't feel loud. It felt hollow. Like someone had scooped something out of my chest and left me standing there, still breathing, still functioning, but fundamentally altered. I stayed in that bathroom for a long time, long enough for them to leave the kitchen, long enough for the house to feel unfamiliar, long enough for something inside me to shift. That night, I didn't confront him. I didn't ask questions. I didn't cry in his arms or demand explanations. I went to bed early. I lay on my side, facing away from him, staring into the dark while he moved around the house like nothing had happened. When he finally climbed into bed, he didn't touch me. He didn't apologize. He fell asleep within minutes. I stayed awake, listening, thinking, replaying every moment, every red flag I had ignored, every time I had told myself I was being paranoid. And somewhere between midnight and morning, I made a decision, not out of anger, not out of revenge, out of clarity. That night didn't just change my marriage. It changed me. Chapter 2. Silence is louder than screaming. The next morning, I woke up before my alarm. For a few seconds, I lay still, staring at the ceiling, hoping, irrationally, that the night before had been a dream. That my mind had stitched together something cruel out of stress and exhaustion. Then I felt the space beside me emptied. I sat up slowly, the house already awake in that subtle way that tells you someone else has been moving through it. The shower was running. His side of the closet door was open. Normal sounds. Normal signs, except nothing was normal anymore. I didn't rush. I didn't storm into the bathroom. I didn't rehearse angry speeches in my head the way movies taught me I should. Instead, I got out of bed, made the sheets neatly, and went downstairs. The kitchen looked exactly the same, clean counters. Coffee maker blinking 7:02. The faint scent of last night's cooking still lingering in the air. If you didn't know what had happened there, if you hadn't seen it with your own eyes, you'd never guess this room had been the place where my life quietly split in two. I poured myself coffee and sat at the island, the same island where his hand had brushed hers, the same place where he told me not to make a scene. I wrapped both hands around the mug and waited for the anger to come. It didn't. What came instead was something colder. Heavier. A kind of stillness that settled deep in my chest. When he came downstairs, he acted like a man who believed he had won something. He kissed the top of my head, brief and distracted. Opened the fridge. Asked if I had slept okay. I answered calmly. Politely, yes. That seemed to relax him. He talked about work. About traffic. About a meeting he was late for. He never mentioned the woman. Never acknowledged the tension sitting between us like a loaded weapon. Before he left, he grabbed his keys and said, "We'll talk later." Not "I want to talk," not "we need to talk," just a statement. Like a reminder. Like he was still in control of when this conversation would happen. I smiled and nodded, all right. The door closed behind him, and the house went quiet again. That's when I did something unexpected. I didn't cry. I opened my laptop. I've always been good at noticing patterns. It's part of my job, reading between lines, catching inconsistencies, understanding systems. I realized, sitting there in my kitchen, that this was no different. If he thought my silence meant ignorance, he was wrong. If he thought calm meant weakness, he had miscalculated. I started small. Bank statements. Credit card charges. Nothing obvious at first. But then I noticed it, a hotel charge, once a month, always on a Wednesday. Always in the middle of the workweek. Always the same place. I pulled up our shared calendar. Wednesdays were his late nights. His team dinners. His client meetings. I checked phone records next. I didn't even feel guilty. That surprised me. It felt less like snooping and more like confirming what I already knew. There was one number I didn't recognize. Frequent. Long calls. Almost always during those same Wednesdays. I wrote it down. By the time he came home that evening, I had already built a timeline. I greeted him the same way I always did. Asked how his day was. Listened. Cooked dinner. Set the table. He watched me carefully, trying to decide what kind of silence this was, the dangerous kind, or the convenient kind. At one point, he reached for my hand and said, "You're being very calm about everything." I met his eyes. "I'm just thinking," I said. He nodded, clearly relieved. Good. Let's not do anything dramatic. There it was again. Drama. Scenes. Noise. As if my pain needed to be tidy to be valid. That night, after he fell asleep, I went back to my laptop. I searched the hotel, then the number, then her. Social media makes people careless. She had tagged the restaurant we used to love. The same one he claimed had lost its charm. She had posted a photo 2 months earlier, nothing explicit, just a wine glass and a familiar countertop in the background. My countertop. I closed the laptop and sat in the dark. The realization didn't break me. It sharpened me. This wasn't a mistake, this wasn't confusion, this wasn't a man who had lost his way. This was someone who had made choices. Repeatedly. Comfortably. Confident that I would either never find out, or never do anything about it, and that was his real mistake, because my silence wasn't surrendered. It was preparation. Over the next few days, I became invisible in a way only women know how to be. I laughed at the right moments. I asked the right questions. I made myself small enough to be underestimated, and while he relaxed, while he believed the storm had passed, I began laying the groundwork for what came next. I didn't know exactly how everything would unfold yet, but I knew one thing with absolute certainty. That night in the kitchen had changed everything, and soon, he was going to understand that silence can be far more dangerous than screaming. Chapter 3: The mistake he didn't know he made. By the end of that week, I knew more about my husband's life than he realized. Not the version he showed the world, not the version he showed her. The real one, the paper trail, the digital breadcrumbs, the small careless habits that tell the truth when people don't. He thought he was careful. That was the mistake. It started with a message he forgot to delete. He had left his laptop open on the dining table before rushing out for work. Normally, I wouldn't have touched it. Normally, I would have respected that invisible line we pretend protects marriages, but Normal had already left the house. The screen lit up when I walked past. A notification slid into view. * Can't wait for Wednesday again. * No name. Just a heart emoji. I didn't open the message. I didn't need to. What I needed was something else, proof that couldn't be dismissed, minimized, or explained away with practiced excuses. I sat down and logged into our shared cloud account. That's when I found the folder. He hadn't hidden it. He hadn't even renamed it. Just a generic label buried among work documents and receipts. Inside were photos, screenshots, hotel confirmations, travel itineraries, and then there were videos, short clips. Laughing. Wine glasses clinking. Her voice in the background, teasing him. My husband. Relaxed. Unburdened. A version of him I hadn't seen in years. I closed the laptop carefully, like it might explode if I didn't. My hands were steady. That scared me more than shaking ever could. That afternoon, I did something I had never done before. I called a lawyer. I didn't say his name right away. I didn't launch into a dramatic story. I simply asked questions. Calm, measured questions about options, documentation, timelines. The lawyer listened. Then she said something that settled deep in my chest. Don't confront him yet. I smiled. I wasn't planning to. Over the next few days, I became an observer in my own marriage. I noticed how confident he had become. How he no longer checked his phone when I entered the room. How he spoke about the future like I was a fixed object, unchanging, predictable, always there. One night at dinner, he casually mentioned transferring some money into a separate account for tax reasons. He said it like it was nothing. I nearly laughed. That was the second mistake, because what he didn't know, what he couldn't have known, was that his attempt to quietly shift control only made my position stronger. I documented everything: dates, amounts, messages, patterns. I learned the rhythm of his lies. Wednesdays were hers, weekends were mine, and Mondays were when he planned. I played my role perfectly. I asked about his day. I listened to stories I now knew were rehearsed. I touched his arm at the right moments, laughed when expected, stayed just engaged enough to keep him comfortable. Comfortable men make sloppy decisions. Then came the invitation. A dinner party at a friend's house. Couples only. Something he insisted we attend. You'll love it, he said. It'll be good for us. I agreed immediately, not because I believed him but because I understood what he didn't. Public spaces change power dynamics. That night, as I stood in front of the mirror getting ready, I barely recognized myself. Not because I looked different, but because I felt aligned. Calm. Focused. Awake. For the first time since the kitchen, I didn't feel like I was reacting. I was orchestrating. The party, he was attentive. Almost affectionate. His hand rested on the small of my back, guiding me through rooms full of laughter and clinking glasses. And then I saw her across the room. She froze when our eyes met, just for a second, but it was enough. Her smile faltered. His didn't. He hadn't seen her yet. I felt something shift again. Not pain this time. Something steadier. When he finally noticed her, I felt the subtle change in his body. The tension. The calculation. The quick glance in my direction to see if I had noticed. I had, but I didn't react. Instead, I leaned closer and whispered, "Everything okay?" He nodded too fast. "Yeah. Just tired." I smiled and kissed his cheek. That was the moment I knew. He thought he was juggling two worlds. What he didn't realize was that both were already slipping out of his hands, because while he was busy managing appearances, I had already secured something far more powerful than anger. I had leverage, and the next move wouldn't be quiet. Chapter 4. The night everything became visible. The dinner party stayed with me longer than it should have, not because of what happened, but because of what almost did. For days after, my husband was unusually careful. Attentive in a way that felt rehearsed. He brought home flowers. Suggested we plan a weekend away. Talked about resetting things, as if our marriage were a browser tab that just needed refreshing. I let him, because when someone thinks they're repairing damage, they stop looking for cracks. The lawyer and I spoke again that Friday. I had sent her everything: documents, screenshots, timelines. She was quiet for a long moment before saying, "You've been very thorough." I smiled to myself. I had time. She told me we were ready. That if I wanted to file, we could. That legally, strategically, I was in a strong position, but filing wasn't what I wanted yet, not because I hesitated, because I understood something fundamental about my husband. He feared embarrassment more than consequences. So when the opportunity came, I didn't hesitate. It was his company's annual fundraiser, a formal event, downtown, black tie. Spouses encouraged. Photos guaranteed. A room full of people whose opinions mattered deeply to him. He was excited about it. Nervous in that self-satisfied way men get when they believe they're admired. "You'll come, right?" he asked casually. "Of course," I said. The night of the event, I watched him watch me as I got ready. He complimented my dress, lingered a little longer than usual in the doorway. He needed me there. As proof. As cover. At the venue, everything glittered. Crystal glasses, soft lighting, polished smiles. I moved through the room like I belonged, because I did. I had been his partner for years. I knew these people. Their habits. Their assumptions. She was there too, not as his date. Not officially, but close enough that I saw the way he tracked her movements without realizing it. Close enough that I noticed how others noticed. Midway through the evening, the CEO took the stage. Speeches began. Applause followed on cue. That's when my husband leaned in and whispered, "I'm glad you're here." I looked at him. "I know," I said. Later, when the crowd thinned and conversations deepened, I excused myself. Walked calmly toward the back of the room where a few executives stood talking quietly. I joined them, mentioned something casually, nothing accusatory, nothing dramatic. Just enough truth wrapped in concern. It spread faster than I expected. Whispers travel quickly in rooms like that. By the time my husband noticed something was off, it was too late. The looks had changed. The warmth had cooled. Conversations ended when he approached. On the drive home, he was silent. At a red light, he finally spoke. "What did you say tonight?" I turned to him slowly. "I told the truth," I said. His grip tightened on the steering wheel. "You had no right." I laughed softly. "Not unkindly, you lost the right to decide that," I replied. That was the first time he looked scared. At home, the argument he had postponed finally tried to surface. He raised his voice. Accused me of manipulation. Of trying to ruin him. I let him talk. When he finished, I said, "I didn't ruin you. I stopped protecting you." He stared at me, searching for the woman who would retreat. She wasn't there anymore. That night, I slept peacefully for the first time in weeks, because everything was finally visible, and once things are seen, they can't be unseen. Chapter 5. What was left after the silence? The divorce papers were filed on a Monday, not because it was symbolic, not because I wanted a dramatic beginning. Monday was simply the day everything finally felt finished. He didn't fight it the way I expected. There were no courtroom theatrics. No public denials. No grand speeches about love or regret. By the time the paperwork landed in front of him, most of the damage had already been done, quietly, efficiently, without the explosion he had once warned me not to cause. The fundraiser had consequences: work restructuring, sudden distance from people who used to return his calls immediately, questions he couldn't answer without lying, and lies that no longer landed. He tried, once, to talk to me. We were standing in the kitchen again. The same place where everything had begun. "I never meant for it to go this far," he said. I looked around the room. The counters. The light. The island. "You did," I replied calmly. "You just didn't think it would reach you." That was the last real conversation we had. The house sold quickly. The assets were divided fairly, more fairly than he expected. The lawyer smiled when she told me the outcome. "You were prepared," she said. I nodded. I had to be. The night he moved out, the house felt strangely light. Not empty, cleared. Like a space after a storm when the air smells cleaner and everything looks sharper. I stood alone in the kitchen once more, and this time, the quiet didn't hurt. Weeks passed. Then months. People asked careful questions. Took sides quietly. Offered sympathy I didn't always want. Some days were heavy. Some days felt impossibly free. What surprised me most wasn't the grief. It was the absence of fear. I no longer measured my reactions. I no longer made myself smaller to keep peace. I didn't scan rooms for his approval or adjust my tone to avoid tension. I trusted myself again. One evening, not long after the divorce was finalized, I cooked dinner just for me. Music playing softly. Windows open. The same wine glass with the chipped rim, still mine. I caught my reflection in the darkened window. She looked different, not harder, not colder, clearer. That night in the kitchen hadn't destroyed me. It had introduced me to the woman I had been postponing, the one who doesn't scream, the one who doesn't beg, the one who understands that silence, when chosen, can change everything. And this time, the quiet felt like peace.